Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. So this channel, Everyday Data Science, is all about trying to learn the different concepts involved in science by practicing a lot of questions. In this video, I'm going to solve this question and start a scratch regarding the most popular client ID among users using video and voice calls, both using Python as well as MySQL, and try to walk you through how we can develop solutions to such problems. The difficulty level of this question is hard. This question has been asked in Microsoft and Apple interviews, and it's a great question if you are preparing for data engineer, data scientist, BI analyst, data analyst roles. Okay, let's jump right in. The question reads, select the most popular client ID based on a count of the number of users who have at least 50% of their events from the following list: video call received, video call sent, voice call received, and voice call sent. So we are given a data frame called fact events, and our expected output is a pandas data frame, basically one column, client ID, based on the certain conditions that are described in the question. And let's look at this data frame fact events. So we have several columns, right? Time ID, user ID, customer ID, client ID, event type, right? So in this event type, we want that it should be one among those four, and the percentage should be at least 50%. So basically what this question is saying, so everything after this, right? So based on count of number of users who have at least 50% of their events in this list. So basically this is a where clause. It is saying you have this data frame fact events, and in this you need to tell what is the most popular client ID, right? But you are only going to count those users who had at least 50% of their events in the following list. So you cannot directly go ahead and do a group by of client ID, do a count star, and sort in decreasing manner, etc. The first thing that you should do is try to find out who all users actually have at least 50% of their events in this following list. So what we can do is, let's start making one. Since we need to calculate the percentage, right? So the percentage would be how many are in this list divided by the total, right? So, and that should be based on every user, because it says we need to get the number of users who have at least 50%, right? So let's make a data frame called counts, right? And then take, okay, fact events, and then fact events, right? And the column called event type, right? So column called event type, we are performing basically a Boolean indexing, and this should be in, right? So is in, and then we can provide this list, right? So if I go ahead and copy this, because why do write all this again, is in this. So let me go ahead and do, so it's not complete yet, but let me go ahead and run this. Let's see what do we have here. Why is this an error? Because it should be a list that we should provide, right? So if I just okay, so if I run this, so now if you look at it, all the rows are basically where event type is one among these four, right? So once you have this, then you need, okay, for every user ID, what is the count of the event belonging to this, any of these four, right? So what we can do is we can just do group by, right? Group by the user ID, group by the user ID, take the event type column, perform a count, and since you grouped by user ID, you need to do reset index so that user ID appears as a column. Again, let me go ahead and run this. So now if you look at it, you have user ID, and even though it says event type, we can rename it, but this is basically the count of event type belonging to any of these four. So let me go ahead and rename this. So rename, what do we want to rename? Columns, and then we can provide the old and new values, right? So old value is event type, and let's rename it to, let's say, counts. Okay, let me go ahead and run this again. So now you have basically user ID and the counts in basically in any of these four. Once you have the counts, you also need to get for every user ID what is the total, right? So obviously in this plus whatever is when the event is not in any of these four, right? So you can basically do the same thing again. Let's make a data frame called totals, which is just going to be the same thing, but so y2, right? Let's save our time, paste it, and here we don't need this bullet indexing because we are not doing any kind of stuff. We're just doing, okay, fact event, group by the user ID, take the event type, count it, reset the index so that it appears as a column, then rename the event type, and it should be total, right? So total. Now let me go ahead and run this again. Let's see, what do we have? Okay, so for various user IDs we have the total. So now we have the counts, so anything belonging to of these four, divide, and you also have the totals for every user ID. So obviously to get the percentage you divide these, right? So let's firstly perform a merge, right, so that we have both of this column at one place. So let's call that as percentage or percent. Let's call that data frame, and we perform a merge, right? So counts dot merge, right? Counts dot merge, and the second data frame is totals. We are merging on, since both of them have user ID, so user ID, and by default it merges inner, and obviously it does make sense, right? Because if you have a value in the counts but you don't have in totals, or you have in totals but you don't have in counts, right? So it does not make any sense because you are not going to able to get the percentage, right? So even though it is inner, let's explicitly mention it. So how is equal to inner, right? Okay, let me go ahead and run this. Let's see, what do we have? So now you have user ID, counts, and the total. So obviously we can go ahead and make a column, right? So percent, and let's call this as percent value, right? Percentage value. What is the value of that percentage or fraction or whatever, like it does not make matter. So here what do we do is percent, right, take the counts column, right, take the counts column and then divide it by the total column, right? Let me just see. Okay, counts and total. Okay, so let's look at what do we have now. Percent, and if I run this, so you have, okay, so user ID, counts, total, and percent value. Okay, so once we have this, then what we can do is let's make sure that all this information that we collected right now, it is present in the initial data frame that we have, fact events, right? Because now we are going to perform a Boolean indexing based on percentage value. So now we have the user ID, right? So users who have at least 50% of their events, now we are going to do that part, right? So let's make a data frame called df, which is basically fact events, right? Fact events, and dot merge this with percent, right? Merge this with percent. Both of them have user ID, so on user ID, and let's keep how is equal to left, right? You can do inner, that does not matter, right? But let's do left, and okay. So let me go ahead and see what do we have now, right? So now you have all these columns from fact events and these three from percent that we created, right? So percentage value, you have the fraction part of it. Okay, now we need to perform a Boolean indexing that we are only required to keep those rows where percent value is greater than equal to 0.5. Right, so let's perform that Boolean indexing. So df of percent value is greater than equal to 0.5, right? And then let's see, what do we have? Run this. Okay, so now we have all the percentage values which are at least 0.5, right? So once we have this, then what do we need? So now this part is done, right? Number of users on this list, this part is done. Then it is asking, okay, once you have this, then you need to find out the most popular client ID, right, based on count, right? So most popular client ID, how we can get that? Okay, so now what we can do is we can take this column client ID and do a value counts. What does value counts do? It counts the number of values in a particular unique values in a particular column, right? So you can take the column client ID, right, and do a value counts. Value counts is basically grouping by and then counting, right? So since we are grouping by, we also need to do reset index, right? So that index appears as a column. Let me go ahead and run this. Let's see what do we have. So you have various, clients and the client ID, or basically when this says client ID, this is basically the count, right? So what we can do is we can rename it, let's say dot rename, right? What do we want to rename? Columns. And then the first pair is you need to change index, right? Index to client ID, right? Because that is what we need in the output as well, right? If I do expected output, you need client ID. So what we can write here is client ID, and then you need to change this client ID part, right? Client ID part into, let's say, anything number or something like that, right? Let me go ahead and run this again. So now you have client ID and the number. Now what we need to do is let's store this in another data frame called df2. Now what you can do is you can just simply do dot head, only one row, and then keep the client ID column. But let's make sure that our solution is generalized. What if there are multiple clients with same maximum, right? So make this more generalized. So what we can do is we perform a Boolean indexing. So df2, right, take the number column, it should be equal to df2 number column dot max. So now this is a generalized. So even though max changes, we are always going to have all the clients which have the maximum value, right? Let me go ahead and run this. So now you have client ID and number, and we are required only keep the client ID part, right? So we can just provide that, okay, only keep client ID. Okay, let me go ahead and run this. So now if you see, our output is same as expected output. Let me go ahead and submit it to pass all the test cases. So yeah, everything is green, and this is how we do it. Now let's look at how the corresponding code looks like in MySQL. Okay, so if you look at it, same question, table fact events, expected output is same as well. And if we preview this table fact events, we have the same values, columns, rows, etc. right? So here again, what we can do is firstly, we need to perform a count, then we get the total, and then we get the percentage. But in Python, we had to do that. In SQL, you can do all the three steps in one, line of code. So what we can do is from this fact events, let's group by the user ID, right? Because we need to firstly find which all users satisfied this condition, right? Have at least 50% of their events in the following list. So group by user ID, return user ID, and then let's calculate the percentage. So how we can do that? So case when your event type, right? Case when your event type is in this list. So let's copy this, right? So let's copy this here, paste it here, right? Then you give it 1, else you give it 0. And then since you started a case when statement, you end it. So this is basically what? Counting, right? So you sum it up. So this will give you the count, and then you divide by the total, right? Count star, and then let's multiply it by 100, right? Multiply it by 100. Why we are multiplying by 100.0 and not 100? To take care of the problem of integer division, which I have discussed in detail in my previous videos, right? So you will get the percentage, or even if you don't need that, like, it is okay, right? It does not matter. Okay, so once we have this, then let's alias this as percentage or something like that, right? Let's alias this as percentage. Let me go ahead and run this. Let's see what do we have, right? So now you have user ID and various percentages, but we are only required to keep those ones, right? We'll only require to keep those ones where your percentage is greater than or equal to 50. Okay, so let's here only what we can do is, since we are grouping by, then how do we filter based on an aggregate? You can use the having clause. So here you can just go ahead and write having percentage greater than equal to 50, right? You can perform this step later on as well, but what I'm doing is, like, if we are using SQL, it is such a good language, right? So let's perform all this required stuff at one place, right? Now let me run this. So there are only two user IDs with percentage at least 50, right? Let's store this in a common table expression. So with CTE as, and then this entire thing goes into parentheses, right? And then what do we need to do is, now once we have identified these users, then what we are doing is, okay, from our fact events, let's only keep those rows where user ID belongs in this list, right? So from the fact events, let's keep only those rows where user ID in, right? Select user ID from CT, and let's keep all the columns for now, right? Just for demonstration purposes. So let's run this. So now you have only those rows where user ID belongs to those two, and those two satisfy this condition, right? Users who have at least 50% of their events from the following list. So now once we have this, then we need to get the most popular client ID. So let me go ahead and group by, right? So group by client ID, return client ID, count star, and let's alias this as number. And then if I go ahead and order by number in decreasing manner, we don't need this, right? But let me, just for it should be ordered by. Let me run this. Okay, so now you have different client IDs and number, just like what we had in Python, right? We don't need this order by, this is just for demonstration purposes. And again, here you can do limit one and only keep client ID, but let's make our solution generalized, right? So let me remove this order by. You can keep it here, it won't affect the solution in any way, but let's save this as well in common table expression 2 as, then this entire thing again goes into parentheses, right? And then from this common table expression 2, where num is equal to return max of number from common table expression 2, right? And then return the client ID part only. So let me go ahead and run this. Okay, so you have client ID desktop. Let me go ahead and submit it to pass all the test cases. So yeah, everything is green, and this is how you do it. So yes, it is lengthy, it is hard question, right? Because you have to, do a where. We are basically performing a where clause, right? Number of users belonging in this list, and then based on that, you are going to calculate the most power. So it might be somewhat confusing, right? And it is lengthy as well, because we had to do a lot of merges and all that. But once you identify that part, so then it becomes easy, right? So this is how we do it. Let me know if there is a better way or more efficient way you can think of to solve this question. Let the solution be in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.